Hey everybody, welcome into another episode of the Flyover League. Jamie Plunkett here, alive and well, alongside Noah Darling, also alive and well. It was hit or miss there for a moment, Noah, but we are here doing another episode, ready to talk about Big 12 baseball and all of the chaos that has ensued over the last weekend and heading into this one, as we are now just 2 weekends away from the end of the regular season.
Well, there's never any doubt of my health and my aliveness per se. It's all on you. So, whatever demons you've been battling in and out of the hospital, maybe I'm not privy to any of that, but it's great to have you back. Whatever you were dealing with, you seem to be over it, whether it was Brahms or something else at hand. But it's, I was telling somebody this yesterday. It feels weird that we have 2 weeks of regular season baseball left, but it also feels right on track. I don't know how to describe that feeling at the same time. Again, it's been a while since we were in Arlington together, holding hands week one, and now we're getting ready to talk about what the postseason might look like this evening on May 7th. I don't know where the time went, but I can promise it'll slow down once the season does end and we start to say, when does baseball start again? But we have about a month and a half until that point.
Well, you're a parent, so time will never slow down again. I've got that bad news for you. But listen, I can say categorically here on the show that Brahms twice in one day was not what set me back over the early part of this week. That was delightful. I have no qualms with my Brahms intake from Sunday. And in fact, Brahms representatives have reached out to check on me and to make sure that I was okay. And just really, to be clear, they reached out through their lawyers to make sure that the food wasn't what did it to me. No, I just, you get sick every once in a while. It just happens. But
well, I look at it the other way, Jamie. It's if you had not had the Brahms, imagine how much more sick you would have been. Thank God right. You had Brahms twice.
Yeah, my body was prepared with a single burger, a double burger, a Dr. Pepper, and a chocolate milkshake, which makes me sound like the healthiest person on the planet.
Well, triple it, and you're close to about what I had in the course of a weekend. So
goodness
you have some ground to make up.
Yeah, we were swerving a little bit on the way back from Stillwater on Sunday, but it was fine. It was totally fine. But yeah, Noah, man, it's 2 weeks left in the regular season. This is crazy that we've gotten to this point. Since we're doing this a little bit later in the week than normal, let's maybe not do a full breakdown of every single series from last weekend. Talk through a little bit of the highs and lows, and then we'll move on and focus more on tournament bubble, what things look like right now for Big 12 teams, and then take a look at this weekend. So, but as we kind of dive in here, just what stands out to you from last weekend as kind of a key storyline?
Well, the number one thing that you don't want to get bogged down in what goes viral on Twitter, but you were in the house for when Kirk Saarloos grabbed his briefcase and made his march to left field, which is, I assume, is where any coach would go if they were ejected. I assume he did not just go out to left field for no reason, but I have not had the privilege of seeing an ejection at Albeit Stadium in my handful of times that I've been there. So just curious on your eye in the sky perspective on that, and maybe what you would have done differently if you were Kirk Saarloos, if anything, because I wouldn't have done anything differently.
Look, there are a lot of opinions about what happened to Kirk on Saturday night. First and foremost, for those that didn't see it, I don't know how you would have missed it if you're listening to this podcast of all podcasts, but Kirk Saarloos, TCU's head coach, did get ejected in the 7th inning on Saturday night against Oklahoma State in what ended up being a 9-2 win for the Cowboys. And yes, so that he did have to make the long walk out towards left center field. That is the visitors' entrance. That's where the visitors' clubhouse and locker room are. So that is the way. That's the only way to go. There's no like gate to anything on the visitor side of the field, which is the first base side. So that was his only option. He was not doing it in protest, although that would have been pretty funny. But no, I as far as why he was arguing. So if you guys watched the game on Saturday, there were two very close calls. One was challenged by TCU and upheld in favor of Oklahoma State. It was a play at the plate. I believe it was Aiden Miola got his hand in just before a Nolan Traeger tag, as it was called on the field, safe. and then after TCU's challenge was upheld as safe. There were a couple angles there where, as you know, I was doing the radio broadcast for TCU, and I was talking with Chuck Lamondola, my partner on the call, and as we're watching the replay on the monitor, basically saying we don't see how there's really anything here that could possibly overturn this call to make this an out. This feels like there's just no evidence this call needs to stand. Although there were a couple questionable angles, and then later in the game, in the seventh inning, TCU takes a 2-0 lead. Oklahoma State comes back and ties it 2-2 in the seventh, and they've got a runner on first, and guy hits a double. I believe it was Alex Conover, or maybe he singles to left field, and Danny Wallace, I believe, slides into third. Great tag from Jack Bell. Great throw from Colton Griffin. Called out at third base for the second out of the inning. Important out at this point. 2-2 ball game, and that's the second out where you're talking about runners on the corners with one out. Josh Holliday comes out of the dugout real quick, challenges that call for Oklahoma State. The umpires take probably legitimately 7 minutes to review this call, and they come back and they overturn it. And similar to the one prior, I didn't think there was enough on film to give you the evidence to overturn that call. Obviously, the umpires saw it differently, overturned that call, and gave Oklahoma State their runner at third base and took an out off the board. And that sent Kirk Saarloos into orbit pretty much. He came out, was pretty fired up, had a conversation with the home plate umpire. Also of note, there was a little bit of a ball and a strike issue, I think, earlier in the inning, or maybe even the sixth inning against Colin Ritchie, where there was an assumed strike three call that didn't go TCU's way. Anywho, all of that kind of built up to this moment where Kirk decided that it was time to let everyone know how he felt. He did so in a manner that got him ejected. That happens from time to time with the best of baseball coaches, and Kirk Saarloos definitely isn't immune to that. He's been tossed his fair share over his 5 years of being TCU's head coach. And then he lingered, and that was where things kind of got a little too interesting. You can make your point, you can get tossed, and you can do the things to try and fire up your squad. But at the end of the day, I think that's where you have to kind of draw a line for yourself as a head coach. And obviously, being removed from the situation, way easier to say, oh, yeah, that guy should have controlled his emotions better in the moment when he was really pissed. But when you hang out on the field for as long as Saarloos did, and you let every single umpire get their fair share of your hatred in that moment, you get the 2-game suspension. That sets your team back a little bit, right? We saw them get set back on Sunday. Great offensive day, terrible pitching day for TCU. Not a great pitching day, really, for Oklahoma State either. But and then he can't coach on Friday this weekend in Fort Worth against Utah. The suspension carries through to that. So do I think he was wrong in getting ejected? No, I mean, it happens, right? Calls don't go your way. It's a bang play. It's a pretty high leverage moment in a series when you're trying to kind of scrap and claw for it. Want to show your team that you care, that you have their back. I think it was the lingering and the staying and getting the suspension that maybe probably shouldn't do that in the future. And then obviously the walk from the first base dugout all the way to left field was hilarious and got memed into oblivion. And I was talking to some of the folks at TCU, and there were obviously major accounts tweeting and sharing this stuff on Instagram, and all of them were trying to collab with TCU baseball, like they were going to just share in that joy that everyone else was having, which I thought was pretty funny. It's like, no, I think that's, you guys have fun with that. I don't think TCU baseball's accounts are going to get in on that, but no, it happens from time to time with coaches. They get tossed, they get frustrated, but I think he maybe took it a step too far in earning the suspension there.
And you touched on it a little bit, but the obvious speculation is how much did that really impact the team on Sunday? You mentioned pitching decisions. That's the head coach's alley right there, especially Kirk, a pitching guy. You don't want to read too much into that, but for a guy or a team that is somewhat disappointed, when something like that turns into a literal multi-game suspension, then also maybe if you really want to read too much into it, a multi-game impact at least. That's tough for TCU, but it was funny for the rest of us. But it was also funny to me that you were there and lucky enough to be on the road with TCU. This didn't happen in Lupton, so it wasn't guaranteed that your presence would be there. But I am going to credit you partially for the event happening.
Oh yeah, TCU fans are crediting me for the TCU getting swept, so that's fine. Just pile on. Look, I took an undefeated home radio record into Stillwater and got wiped up a little bit. So I'm sitting here 5-2 now when I'm on the radio, licking my wounds a little bit. I'll be back on the call Friday and Saturday, so we'll see. We'll see if we can't get back on track in the booth, and maybe that'll help us get back on track out there on the field. But yeah, it's definitely a disappointing year for the Horned Frogs. I think there's no doubt about it at this point. RPI in the 50s. We'll get into it a little bit, but they're last 4 in right now, according to D1, when it comes to the NCAA tournament. I was a little surprised that they were still in the field, frankly. Yeah, just a tough year for the Horned Frogs. Any way you cut it, injury-wise, performance-wise, standings-wise, all of the above.
Especially relevant to expectations, not just,
Yeah.
TCU's a bubble team. They should be better than on an annual basis, but this was a team that people were talking about maybe winning the national championship. That good, that talented of a roster, and you got to wonder what the offseason might look like in Fort Worth. But again, we still got some time. You never know what the next few weeks might look like in Fort Worth. All Kirk has to do is take away the jerseys, and TCU wins games. So I don't know why he hasn't turned to that yet.
Well, you do it once.
That's true. Yeah.
Can you go back to that well again? I think it's interesting because yes, it's all relative to expectations. But let's just project out that TCU does not make the NCAA tournament this year. Is that likely at this point? I would say it's probably 50-50 one way or the other, just based on where we see this team right now. That'd be the second time in the last 3 years that they haven't made the NCAA tournament. You would have to go back to pre-Jim Schlossnagle to find a 3-year stretch like that again. And Schlossnagle got to TCU, I believe, in 2002. So, not 2002, sorry, 2000 and sometime before 2005, I think, something like that. So, I mean, we're talking about a 20-plus year stretch here where TCU has been in the NCAA tournament. Not including this year, they've only missed it 3 times in the last 20 seasons. So, for expectations, yes, but just generally as a program, I think underachieving is definitely a word you can use for TCU, not just this year, but in this last little stretch. And it's got to get turned around. There's plenty of funding in that program. There's plenty of energy around the program. Fans want it to be good. The administration wants it to be good. TCU's got a new athletic director in Mike Buddy, who played professional baseball for the Yankees, wants baseball to be good and knows baseball. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting offseason either way, I think, for TCU at this point. But missing or making the tournament could have a pretty heavy impact on how things go.
Yeah, excited to see how it shakes out, and I know you'll be at the forefront. So there's no better follow through all this than Jamie Plunkett. The guy knows TCU more than TCU knows TCU sometimes.
Well, let's turn to a team that you know more than its own coach or players may know a little bit, because you are obviously basically at this point on the Kansas beat. And my question for you, Noah.
Go ahead.
My question for you, Noah, is a simple one. At this point in the season, can anybody catch the Jayhawks?
It's so dicey because I saw them play their midweek this week against Creighton, and the offense looked uninspired the last 7 innings of that game. So you see where this team is not built of titanium like they have looked the last month. You saw how they struggled out of the gate. So there's always an opportunity in the Big 12. We saw Kansas and West Virginia play last year, where West Virginia had the chance to win the league, and they still did based on tiebreakers, but Kansas went in and swept them. So certainly West Virginia remembers that. There's always that angle. And let's say West Virginia takes 2 out of 3, and then Arizona State takes care of Oklahoma State. All of a sudden, this conference is very tight heading into that last weekend, where Kansas goes at BYU, which we've seen is not easy to win at anymore. This isn't 2025 and leading up to it. 2026, they've been great at home, BYU has. So there's absolutely that path. But at the same time, the funny thing about Kansas being at home this weekend is they are also pretty good at home. In fact, they're undefeated at home in conference play this year, 12-0 at home in front of those raucous fans, the students, the burners, if you may. I've heard there's potential talk of additional seats as early as this weekend. I wouldn't count it necessarily, but they've thought about it. So there should be a pretty good hand or fans on hand in Hoagland. I got to stop speaking ahead of myself. But either way, to touch on your might as well comment, it really is unfortunate how the schedule worked out, because they keep bringing in these teams that I don't often see. When do I get to see Arizona? Almost never, other than last season when they reached Omaha. But in the regular season, almost never. I can't just not go see Arizona. So it's turned into a situation where I am seeing the Jayhawks play like 6 weeks in a row. But up until that point, I hadn't seen them play at all in person this season. So it's just a twist of fate that geography has a lot to do with. But I'm enjoying watching the Jayhawks play. I think they'll get it done this weekend, but I think they're going to get help from Oklahoma State in doing so because I think that the Cowboys are playing really great baseball right now and have a chance to go take maybe even 2 or 3 against Arizona State. But to stay on track with Kansas a little bit, they don't have any TBAs on the mound this weekend, which is a huge development for them. They know what their rotation is, which is kind of crazy to say for a team that in some projections is a top 8 seed, where not many of those other teams don't know what their rotation looks like weekend to weekend, but they seem to have it squared away now. I'm interested to see how they rebound after a loss, because that's the thing about playing fantastic baseball is you start to really eat your own success and think nobody can beat you. I'm not saying that's the case of this team, but we might find out if that is the case this weekend against a very good West Virginia team in their own right.
Yeah, that's one of the matchups that I'm really looking forward to diving in with you here in a little bit. From my perspective, though, it's so wildly impressive to me that Kansas has gotten to this point and has built this resume, like you mentioned, without really having a solidified weekend rotation. But on the other side of that is the offense that has just come through time and time again, regardless of what situation, who's at the plate, right? We've seen Daryl Osoria, Brady Ballinger, Tyson LeBlanc, Jordan Bach, right? Like just all of these guys come through. Tyson Owens as of late.
Cade
Just
Baldridge.
Cade Baldridge, just everybody has stepped up at a big moment at some point this season. And I think that that's really such a valuable asset to have because you look around the league and you look around the country, and there are some teams, TCU being one of them, where it's like, hey, you've got your big guns and a guy like Sawyer Strohschneider, but if he's not clicking, which he hasn't really been for the entire month of April, you're going to see kind of the deficit of that. Kansas can just turn to any dude they want, it seems, and say, all right, tonight's your turn. And that's covered up a lot of the pitching issues, and I think the pitching issues have started to resolve themselves along the way as well.
It helps when Don Vagley has 45 strikeouts over his last 4 starts. That's a huge development for them. That was somebody who 6 weeks ago, again, the magic number for Kansas, seemingly, he was the guy that got bumped down to Saturday and then eventually to Sunday, and it worked out. He didn't take that negatively in any regard, but then he picked it back up, and then they moved him back to Friday, and you worried, oh boy, is this going to undo it? And then he throws a complete game last Friday. So that's a huge, huge step for them. And then you bring in Mason Cook and Matisse Naral. I don't think we've ever said his last name correctly, and I don't even know if I just did. But the Frenchman, we'll call him. It feels like that's their rotation. That's the one that they're going to stick with. Madden Seidel pitched okay against Creighton for about 2 innings, but just didn't have the juice that the other guys have this season. So I would bet that that's the 3 we see moving forward. But either way, huge series. I'm sure we'll touch on it quite a bit, like you said. But the thing with Kansas is I don't think they've played their best baseball yet this season, and that's because the pitching has been on at certain times and the offense has been on point at others. We haven't really seen it when it's both at the same time. We've seen it with Don Vagley, but never a whole weekend of, man, each pitcher was really good and the offense was really good too. You hope you can tap into that potential in a couple weeks when you're potentially hosting a regional. At minimum, you're making a regional, which is still huge for Kansas, who a couple years ago was pretty far from that conversation.
Absolutely. And we've seen other teams kind of hit that gear at times this season. I think West Virginia is a team we've been able to point at and say they've had weekends like that way earlier in the season. UCF was having weekends like that. Utah had a weekend like that this weekend. Frankly, Oklahoma State pretty much had a weekend like that this weekend. So it's impressive to me that the Jayhawks have built this lead in the conference when they're one of the teams that maybe hasn't put it all together. Before we fully move on to bubble conversations here, are there any other things from this past weekend that you wanted to call out that come to mind? I know we had a really interesting weekend down between Baylor and Texas Tech, the Butt series. Cincinnati, I believe, got a sweep. What else did you want to call out?
Well, Arizona State taking 2 or 3 in Orlando was huge for them and also huge for the league. If you want to think of it as competitive as possible, which it really is. You think about the testament that we just talked about, how great Kansas has been for 6 weeks or more, and they're still have not clinched the league. The Big Ten's been decided. So obviously UCLA is generational. They're number 1 for a reason. but the Big Ten is over with. And Kansas has played pretty similarly in terms of the numbers to UCLA, and this thing is still a little bit up for grabs. So testament to how deep this league is, and a huge part of that is ASU going into Orlando and taking 2 or 3, and they required some help from some clutch hitting. New is it new? I
Yeah.
think I've avoid saying his name all year. Mr. Contreras had a big weekend in Orlando, and Cole Carlone didn't even have his best stuff, and the Sun Devils still win 2 or 3. So that stood out to me because I know that was a series that we were both keeping pretty heavy tabs on, even though we were both at other Big 12 games.
Yeah, and Willie Bloomquist did something really interesting this weekend because their Saturday game got pushed
Yeah.
to Sunday, right? They get like 2 innings in, it gets rained out. They have to push it to Sunday and do the doubleheader thing. Bloomquist decided to roll with his normal Sunday starter, Cole Klecker, to pick up the resumed first end of the doubleheader, which worked out brilliantly because Klecker, I don't even have his numbers in front of me, but he pitched well, gave them some length, and then set them up. I believe Colin Linder started the second end of the doubleheader, but set up the bullpen really to have a lot more success rather than saying, okay, well, we've got to piecemeal together this first game, and then hopefully Cole can take us the way he normally has in game 2. No, we'll just roll our fresh guy out there on his normal day, maybe situationally a little different, and then we'll rebuild the plane following him. I thought that was a really nice tactic. This is a guy that has seemed to really manage his pitching staff well throughout the year. We talked early this season about, regardless of whether their weekends were starting on Thursday or Friday, you knew Cole Carlone was going to be the Friday guy. And, so this it just feels like he's pushed a lot of buttons in the right direction. And now, after a little bit of a midseason slump there, Arizona State's still just sitting pretty second in the league.
We saw Steve Sabins do the same thing, except it was a little bit different when I forget who it was. I don't think it was Montesa. It must have been Chance and Cole who started game 2 or started the end of game 1, or was it 2? The numbers are. I failed 2 math classes, Jamie. I don't know if I've ever told you that, but either way, he started the end of a game that it must have been game 1 that had gone into a postponement overnight, and then he comes out, throws an inning, and then all of a sudden you're still starting in the second game that rolls over. It's a risk because you wonder what happens if he gets roughed up. Do I have to take him out? Am I really going to keep him in longer than I would a reliever? Because guess what? You're actually going to go longer for us. So it was a little bit better circumstance for Arizona State and Klecker. I will say that he did leave with an injury at some point. So I don't know if there's an update on that. Sounded mostly precautionary, but something to keep tabs on for Arizona State. I'm sure their rotation has been revealed at this point, but either way, I do like the move. It's smart. It's intuitive. It's something that I don't know how that can translate to a postseason situation. Obviously, if weather comes into effect, it works out. But I'm always curious as to how teams handle pitching rotations when they switch from a weekend series to a postseason format where you might be playing 3, 4, 5 games to the point where what does that adjustment look like in practice? Do you reserve Cole Carlone maybe if let's pretend Arizona State's a host, you're playing a 4 seed, do you keep Carlone for that 2 seed, or do you say, let's go win the games in front of us? I love the psychology of all that. I don't think Arizona State will have to answer that specific question, but I love the outside the box thinking by both Bloomquist and Sabins the last 2 weeks.
Well, the question there is, does your weekend start on Thursday or Friday? I think if I'm Willie Bloomquist, I'm not messing with Cole Carlone Fridays. I'll figure out the rest of it. Been able to do that pretty much the whole season. But I'm going to let my Friday guy be my Friday guy and set the tone regardless of who the opponent is. Now, tournament time is a little bit different, right? The stakes are a little bit higher. But yeah, if Arizona ends up in that situation where they're, actually hosting, I don't know that the Big 12 will get 2 host sites, but if they did, it seems like Arizona State would be the candidate at this point. But that leads into the conversation. Right now we see all of the projections that are coming across. Pair does a ton. D1 has theirs released this week. Baseball America released theirs recently as well. And it seems pretty consistently still that 7 Big 12 teams are on the inside looking out of the tournament. For D1, Kansas is the number 7 overall seed, so they've earned a national seed and a host. Arizona State, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, UCF, and West Virginia are all 2 seeds. And then, as we mentioned already, TCU was last 4 in as a 3 seed as well. Does that feel right to you at this point? I mean, let's start with Kansas State, Baylor. Like we've seen them kind of take a pretty big backslide here over the last 3 weeks or so. Are they fully out of the picture? I think they might be.
I think it's right for now. I don't want to plant a flag in anybody's funeral yet. I think there's 4 teams that are kind of in the maybe if the buttons go right outside of somebody crazy winning the Big 12 tournament, of course. Theoretically, auto bids can go to anybody, but of the 4 that could maybe improve their case, it would be K State, Baylor, Utah, and BYU. And I think K State and Baylor are definitely the 2 more realistic of those 4, if they're even realistic at all, like you alluded to. But K State has lost at least 6 games in a row, definitely 6 conference games plus in a row at this point. That's obviously a killer in the month of April and early May. And then Baylor hit that slide a few weeks back. Then they take 2 or 3 against Texas Tech, but their metrics looked good at one point. And I'll be honest, I raised my hand and I said, I don't understand why the metrics are that good. You and I are both believers in Baylor as a program, but time and again we've seen this team have opportunities to say, all right, Baylor's here. They're maybe not going to win the league, but they're a contender to compete in the top half. And each time they've fallen a little bit short of that. So I feel like that's going to line up pretty well. When Baylor wins those kind of games, that's when we see them get into the NCAA tournament. And just unfortunately for the Bears, they haven't done that this season. We feel like it's definitely coming maybe next season. And again, maybe the Big 12 tournament happens. Maybe things go their way. Maybe they win out. Who knows? But either way, I do think that the 7 that are universally laid out, the 7 you mentioned, are pretty accurate at this point. And I think that's the way it's going to shake out. But the worry is that maybe TCU folds a little bit. Maybe K-State does figure it out. So I think the numbers between 6 and 8, and with that 7 does feel pretty fair and realistic.
You mean the challenge for both K State, Baylor, and for TCU really at this point is their RPI is pretty miserable, right? TCU is sitting there at 51 after the sweep against Oklahoma State, and Utah's not going to do a ton to help that cause because they're down there at 81, right? So this feels, we'll get into it, but it feels like a must sweep situation for TCU to really kind of get the ship righted in the right direction. Then Kansas State's sitting there at 62. Baylor's at 67. So I don't see a path for a power 4 team to get an at-large bid if their RPI is in the 60s. That just doesn't make sense to me. Really, it doesn't make sense to me in the 50s. Before D1 released their projections this week, I would have told you that TCU wasn't making it after this weekend, but maybe the conference record and some of the non-conference stuff is still propping them up a little bit. But I think right now, if I was a gambling man, if I was Brendan Sorsby, I would say 6 Big 12 teams are going to get in. That's just kind of what it feels like to me, and it very well may be that you see a second Big 12 team get a host, and the cutoff is a little bit higher for the league. We've talked about this back and forth before. I could see that making its way into the equation here, just with the kind of the weakness of TCU's RPI and some other metrics that I know the committee looks at.
I am interested in the politics of it all, if it's even a real thing. I don't know if that's something that they would ever say out loud, but the concept of maybe the Big 12 does get that second host, but consequently, sorry, TCU, sorry, maybe even somebody like Cincinnati. I think their metrics are really good, helping the Bearcats, but even a team like a few weeks ago, Oklahoma State, who was on the bubble, who was looking like they cannot lose a game anymore, but a team like that maybe being on the cutting room floor in exchange for the Big 12 getting 2 hosts. I don't like that politics, those politics, if it's even a real thing, because we're talking about teams here. Oklahoma State does not pump their fist if Kansas hosts a regional. They do not care, in fact. But it's fun to play the conference affiliation game with conferences. I do wish it was as easy as the SEC has it. Now, of course, every coach in America will tell you that that's the best league in America. They've earned it. They win the national championships, but you turn on a TV and watch an SEC game, after a little while, you're going to see the 100%. You win 13 SEC tournament or conference games, you are going to the NCAA tournament. It happens every year, and they've kept track of that stat for however many years. There is no magic number in the Big 12. So LSU fans are sitting, God, just get us to 13 and we're in. There is no magic number for Big 12 teams to root for. So that's kind of annoying. I wish there was a science behind it like there is with the SEC, but again, it might come down to politics.
Yeah, and just to be clear, right, 13 conference wins means you have a losing record. So if there's a guarantee from an SEC perspective of a team with a losing record getting in, as long as they get to 13 and 17. which makes to me no damn sense. I don't care how strong your league is. If you've got a losing record in conference play, let's revisit your qualifications to get into this postseason tournament. And
Yeah.
yes, some years there will be teams that have losing conference records who are absolutely deserving. We see it almost every year, but I think the guarantee there is a little bit ridiculous. And along with that, the 11 host sites or whatever the SEC normally gets is equally ridiculous in my eyes.
To
But
take
yeah,
it even
yeah,
farther, Jamie, and look at the record of what it takes to host as an SEC team. You win 15, 16 games, and you can count on having postseason baseball at your ballpark. Kansas has won 20 Big 12 games. And we can talk about the difference between the Big 12 and the SEC, maybe for a couple hours, but at the same time, 20 conference games has a chance to theoretically win 26 conference games. And that's a team that is maybe in the hosting conversation. Maybe they can sniff out a national seed. Certainly nowhere higher than maybe 7 would be their ceiling, according to what we're seeing right now. So that's just an interesting dynamic between the two leagues right now, and then there's the ACC in the mix as well. The Big Ten might get a few hosts, so it's not as simple as the Big 12 and the SEC breaking bread together. But the differences in leagues are certainly interesting this time of year.
they really are. They really are. Let's see. What are we going to do here? What are we doing here? Let's go ahead and start to turn our attention towards this upcoming weekend because I think there's a lot to dive into, a lot to talk about. So let's kind of reverse engineer this a little bit and just go down the list of the weekend schedule because we've got a game that is going on as we speak, which Texas Tech is currently leading BYU in the bottom of the 7th inning, 2-1, which is terrible for our pick'em because I believe we all picked BYU. Not that
We
really
are all on
matters, I
BYU.
suppose.
I don't
I
know
will
if any
say
of us picked
this.
BYU to sweep.
No, didn't do that. The model picked Texas Tech, and I picked against the model because I thought it
Mm.
had too much to drink. So, you know, maybe I should just shut up and listen to the model permanently. But BYU is in Lubbock playing Texas Tech this weekend. A series win for BYU will put them over 500 in Big 12 play, which if I think either of us had been told that at the beginning of the year without any context whatsoever, we would have said yes, sign us up if we're BYU representatives. We will take that. 12-12 coming into this weekend, a chance to let the offense continue to cook a little bit, although maybe not on Thursday night, in a ballpark that really can be pretty offensive in more ways than one. But just what's your take on BYU Texas Tech this weekend?
Well, the overarching story of these two teams really kind of says it all. It's BYU is having not a top of the league year, they're right in the middle, which again is huge for them. But Texas Tech 10 years ago was a team that was talking about let's host a regional, let's host a super regional, let's go to Omaha, just like we did the year before. An interesting look at where these two programs are, where Texas Tech has lost their identity a little bit while every program around Lubbock wins except for the baseball team. And then BYU, who is experiencing some of that, where every program is winning in that athletic department, and now the baseball program is winning as well. You don't want to look too deep into what that might mean for a program, but BYU's non-conference was not overwhelmingly impressive. This wasn't a team we were looking at and saying, "Hold on, these boys might be for real." Until Big 12 play started, and they're enjoying that. And I don't think Trent Pratt is going to win Big 12 Coach of the Year just based on where they finished the standings, which will probably be again middle of the pack. But I would absolutely listen to people's arguments as to why he should, based on the difference of where you were projected to finish, which to me kind of sounds like when you discuss MVP in professional sports, it kind of falls into the category of how much did you mean to your team versus how much did your team actually win, which player gets the MVP. It's an interesting debate, but I would be tempted to vote for Trent Pratt if the Big 12 came to me and gave me a vote for Coach of the Year because that's quite the step forward in one year. Whether they finish even they could even lose out, and I would even be tempted to say let's listen to the Trent Pratt argument here.
I'd be down for that. I think that it makes sense that more often than not, the team that wins the conference gets the bulk of those kinds of awards or top 3 finish or whatever it may be. But I think year over year growth for those teams near the bottom of the league should also be considered at the very least. And Coach Pratt is definitely one of those guys who deserves to be in the conversation just for what they've done so far this season. Um, Big weekend for Texas Tech in a couple of different ways here too, because you talked about vying for, regionals and national seeds and all that stuff back in the day. Right now, they are in a tie with Arizona at 7-17 in conference play for 12th in the league, which that is the last spot of the Big 12 tournament. They snuck a win from Baylor last weekend, which was big to bring them into that tie because they were a game back of Arizona. But yeah, if you're Texas Tech, right now you're just trying to stay alive. You're just trying to play more baseball. And if you don't want your season to end next weekend, you know, win a game this weekend, win two this weekend if you can, and really just make sure that you're playing in Arizona, later down this month.
The difference in approach between Texas Tech and Arizona right now for that tie for, you call it for 12th, I call it a tie for 13th, because you're playing to make the Big 12 tournament, and in some cases you're playing to miss it. Arizona's just trying to get better as a team. I view Arizona right now as almost a minor league baseball team, maybe even like a single A team, where these guys aren't trying to win the league championship. They're just trying to develop as players individually. And I think that's fun to watch. I was interested in Chip Hale's perspective on that as I talked to him last weekend. Just at some point, when you're a program who's, not to get too far off track on Arizona here, but when you're a program who's focused on development, when you were supposed to be a team that was maybe projected to win the league, when does that switch flip at some point, and do you find joy in that transition? And he seems to be okay with where his team's at right now, and it's not going swell, but it's not going terrible either. Whereas Texas Tech, I would argue that they're kind of living a nightmare season, and it's not the first time they're feeling that feeling. And the dichotomy of those teams being in the same spot right now is interesting to watch, even though they don't really care much about each other, even though they're fighting against each other. It's fun because both these programs, again, have the pedigree to win a lot of big games.
They do have the pedigree, and I think it would not surprise me to see Texas Tech get back to that at some point in the near future, depending on how this offseason goes. We can go ahead and slide on into the Arizona weekend because they are hosting Houston. So, we just talked about Tech, maybe sneaking a win or two from BYU. Well, this is the perfect opportunity really for Arizona to take advantage of a Houston Cougars team that, I mean, they're 4-20 in Big 12 play. I think we all see the writing on the wall in that situation. They're woefully underfunded compared to their conference mates. And that started to bear out really the back half of this year. But Houston traveling to Arizona, I, I see this probably isn't a perfect analogy. This probably isn't a perfect comparison, but you think back to 2024, I guess it was, and that UCLA team was so incredibly young. They lost a ton of baseball games. I watched them come to Fort Worth and get swept by TCU. But you had just a tremendous amount of freshman talent on that roster. Savage managed to survive that season, which wasn't a given at the time. He managed to hold on to that roster, and now look at them, 2 years down the road. I feel like Arizona could be in a similar situation right now where, yes, there were injuries. They lost an insane amount of talent off last year's Omaha team. We all probably overprojected them a little bit just because of that. But they've got incredible young talent up and down this roster that's gotten just an abundance of playing time. And that's more valuable than anything else, especially in a season like this where you can kind of write off all the other expectations and hopes. Just get better. And then this offseason, just keep everyone around, right? You've got to make some changes offensively. Maybe you've got to figure out something there with some of your personnel, some folks on your roster. But, the pitching is there. That's a given. The ability to, the brand is there. The funding is there. Everything is there. You're just young, right? And so I think that for Arizona, I kind of see them in that 2024 UCLA mold. Maybe not. We might not be sitting here in 2028 talking about one seed, national seed Arizona, but I think they're kind of on that path right now.
I like the comparison. I think Tony Lira is an absolute star in the making. We've talked about him relentlessly this season. Nate Nowitzki is maybe a tick behind him, just the way that he hits for contact. It seems like he's guaranteed a base hit a night. A couple more young guys on that team. Then you get a sophomore like Mason Russell, who hasn't really developed on the mound, but a guy that can slide in alongside Smith Bailey, who's also a sophomore, who is being shut down for the rest of the season due to a minor injury, it sounds like, not terribly, but just kind of a we know where we're at situation, so we're not going to risk anything. But there's absolutely the bones to build in that kind of UCLA model. So I really like that. There are some Arizona fans that seem to be a little bit upset with where Chip Hale's at as a head coach. I completely disagree. The
Yeah,
guy
that's
led Arizona to Omaha last year, won the Big 12 tournament, and he knows exactly where his team's at. He's not trying to lie about things. He even said it's a two-way street. We've got to find guys who fit our club just as much as they have to find where they fit, whether it's with us or not. So he knows the storm that's coming as far as the challenge of keeping guys on board, because these are high school kids who, depending on when they committed to a team that was nationally ranked, heading to Omaha, in Omaha, or at least a team that they thought when they had Mason White and Summerfield and Jaron Caulfield last year, where they thought we can go to Omaha, so why don't you come join us in 2 years after we do it? That's a tough transition. Now you're on a team that's not winning, that's barely going to make the Big 12 tournament. Maybe they don't at all. He knows it's coming, and I'm all aboard the Chip Hale train. That guy knows what he's doing. So I'm bought in on Arizona. I like the take.
so they have right now, according to Perfect Game, the 25th best recruiting class for 2026 that they signed. Let's see. They were top 40 in 2025. This is not as high as I thought it would be, to be completely honest with you. Let's go back to 2024 here, even though that won't really be helpful in this scenario.
I'm not telling you
Uh,
anything you don't know, Jamie, but it's sometimes good to not be the best when it comes to college baseball recruiting. You don't want to be number
sure.
one because you've got MLB draft picks on your team or on your roster
This
per
is
se.
true. This is true. I was expecting maybe for them to be closer into the TCU range more often than not. TCU is typically a top 15, top 20. You see, West Virginia had the 15 overall class in 2025. Let's see, Arizona State was 22. Okay, well, I was going to say something about recruiting that just is irrelevant now, but I think that when it comes to accruing young talent and developing it quickly, I think there's no doubt that this staff is going to be capable of that. And I think they maybe have been able to understand kind of where they maybe missed a little bit, or under not underprepared, but just under addressed some things maybe in the portal this off season. Uh, Talking to Chip Hale when Arizona was in Fort Worth earlier this year, he said some similar things to me that he relayed to you this weekend, where it's just, we're very young. Our goal right now is to just keep playing baseball and make the Big 12 tournament. I mean, he was telling me that when
Yeah.
Arizona was in Fort Worth in March, right? So he understands where the team is right now. I don't think he's out there being deceitful, and the fact that the fan base is upset to the point where they're talking about him kind of reveals just how supported the program is, right? So, I think it's I said this on Big 12 radio last week. I've said it on this podcast before. I am not concerned about the long-term future of Arizona baseball in any way, shape, or form. Uh, Houston, I am concerned.
Yeah.
Texas Tech, I am concerned, right? There are other teams in the Big 12 where if things don't get better quickly, or if changes don't get made quickly in one way or another, then the future still kind of looks bleak. But I just don't see Arizona in that scenario, in that situation at all.
And they might even, Jamie, chew on this. Theoretically, Tony Pluta could return next season after his redshirt year this season. Now, maybe he goes pro, maybe he goes portaling, who knows? But he still has eligibility. If you forgot about how great he can be out of the bullpen, that's just one guy, but it's a nice piece to potentially almost gain after not having him this season.
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely, it is. Let's move on to a big weekend series coming up at the Hog, where you've indicated there might be additional seating
Could
brought
be.
in. Maybe not until Kansas has solidified itself as a regional host and potentially a national seed. But West Virginia Mountaineers head to the Kansas Jayhawks this weekend. This is the matchup of the week, in my opinion. What's your take on Mountaineers versus Jayhawks?
I think it's the matchup of the week nationally, not just in our conference. I'm not that well versed in what else is happening, but I don't really care either. This one is kind of my Super Bowl mentally, not in terms of just me being there, but class of the Big 12 against class of the Big 12. I think West Virginia is playing fantastic baseball right now. They turned a corner after stumbling against Cincinnati. They looked really, really good against K State, which to be fair, who isn't looking good against K-State as of late, but they look dominant. And the pitching staff is healthy. Max Yale is back. He's going on Friday night. And then you get Chanson Cole and Dawson Montesa. That's a really, really good 1-2-3. And Dawson was good against K-State last weekend as well, which is big because that's a guy who struggled a little bit. And then Gavin Kelly is playing tremendous baseball right now. He had a couple homers against K-State, I think up to 10 on the year. He's just a total star. I think that we would be talking a lot more about Gavin Kelly if Landon Hairston did not exist at Arizona State. But he's a tremendous player. And Paul Schoenfeld is from the Kansas area, so it's going to be a little bit of a homecoming for him at minimum. He's playing really, really well right now. That's a guy that feels like he's due to win maybe Big 12 Player of the Week one of these last 2 weeks. He's been that good the last couple. And then looking at Kansas, this is still a club that's won however many conference games in a row. They've won 12 of them in a row at home, which is where this game is being played. Still like 27 of the last 31 games. Just a crazy stretch for this team who is built on guys who just are playing baseball for their last time ever, in all likelihood. Some guys will go pro, but guys that are playing their 5th or 6th year of college. It's just a culmination of the Big 12's best, in my eyes, on the field this weekend in Lawrence, and I can't wait to be there. I'll be there on Friday and Saturday. Apparently, there's something called Mother's Day on Sunday. I don't know what that's all about, but I'll get to the bottom of that when we get to the bottom of that. But I hope for good baseball. But if you tell me right now that Kansas wins the Big 12 this weekend, I hope it happens on Saturday so I can be there. But otherwise, if West Virginia looks really good and maybe works their way up to the hosting conversation, that's okay with me too.
Look, it's win-win for the league, I think, this weekend, regardless, because you either have Kansas solidify itself as a national seed or you have another host kind of enter the picture. Yeah. And I think the Big 12 would take it either way. I also love Gavin Kelly. I think the position versatility that he brings is something that we're going to start to see more of across college baseball as rosters start to even out a little bit. I know there are tons of teams playing above the 34-man limit this year that won't be available going forward as much. And then I just think that the more that you have guys that can do multiple things, the better off you're going to be. Gavin Kelly is an example of that. Matthew Gravelin is an example of that because he's the other guy that catches at a pretty high level for West Virginia. And you're starting to see around the league. What's that?
Armani Guzman. There's another one.
Armani. Right. Yeah. And I mean, West Virginia has, I think, started to really identify that path forward more than a lot of other schools. So we see it occasionally here and there, but just the level, the number of players on their roster that can do multiple things at a high level is really impressive. And I think that's been one of the big threads for why they've had so much success the past few years, right? These guys are not all 1-year guys. I mean, Gravelin is, but Kelly is not, Guzman is not. A lot of these guys have been around for a while. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to this weekend. I think it's going to be a good one for both of those teams. I have Kansas, I think, taking 2 of 3 in that series in our pick'em. But that's not for lack of faith or trust or love for the West Virginia Mountaineers. Eat shit pit always and every day. Let's keep on moving here, though. Down to another very interesting and potentially standings impactful weekend out in Tempe, where Arizona State's going to host Oklahoma State. These are two teams that are starting to catch fire again, starting to gain some forward momentum at the right time. Arizona State obviously coming off of the series win in Orlando last weekend. Oklahoma State sweeping TCU at home. They've won 6 Big 12 games in a row now. All of a sudden, the Cowboys are looking like the team we expected them to be all year. They got Hudson Barrett back. They got Noah Weck back. They got Avery Ortiz back, right? Healthy teams play good baseball, and healthy teams in Stillwater absolutely do that. What are you looking forward to about the Cowboys versus the Sun Devils out in Tempe?
Well, I still want to see what Oklahoma State looks like on the road. Up until that series at Texas Tech 2 weeks ago, this is a program or a club that had not won on the road this season in terms of Big 12 conference play. Can they sustain what they look like against TCU when they leave the confines of O'Brate Stadium? And then they're playing Arizona State, who also just looked really good on the road separately at UCF. And that's a program that a few weeks ago, there were people talking about, man, are these guys going to miss the tournament? Their RPI doesn't look great. And yet we sat here, and at the same time, we said they might have the best pitcher in the league, and Cole Carlone could be. And they probably definitely have the best bat in the league, at least this season, in Landon Hairston. So when you take those two things, you have to wonder, there's no way they missed the tournament, right? And the last few weeks since then, Arizona State has agreed with us. There's no way that they missed the tournament. And it feels like this is muscle against muscle right now, first to 20, a couple of these games at least. But Cole Carlone has to have his A game against a guy like Colin Ritchie. Maybe, and this is an ode to you, Jamie, maybe you just walk the guy. I know that's a crazy concept that not a lot of people have thought of, but maybe you just walk Colin Ritchie with the way he's playing right now. But Oklahoma State's healthy. Their starting pitching has taken shape, which we've been waiting for all year. We talked about the restraints of that, just the number of guys that they have with arms on their team. But with Ethan Lund against Cole Carlone, it's hard to beat that as far as Big 12 arm versus Big 12 arm. That'll be a really, really fun one. And I haven't checked the timing of that game, Jamie. I hope it's a little bit later so I can tune in for a good chunk of that after the game in Lawrence. But I will say that both the Friday and Saturday game between the Pokes and the Sun Devils are on ESPN2. So that only helps the league as well.
It really does. It really does help the league. As far as RPI goes, we have Arizona State sitting there at 40, Oklahoma State sitting at 34. Arizona State 33 and 15, though. I don't think the RPI is as big of a deal for them as for other schools. And then Oklahoma State has really put themselves in good position, really good position over the last few weeks. And yes, I would advise walking Colin Ritchie. Absolutely. I don't care what the situation is. I don't care if the bases are loaded with no outs. Walk Colin Ritchie. He hit, I believe, 100 home runs against TCU this weekend because they just insisted on pitching to him. And he will make you pay for fastballs up in the strike zone. He will do that. That is a thing he will do. I mean, Oklahoma State's whole team, though, to their credit, hammers the baseball. I know O'Brate is a funky stadium. It plays much smaller than it is. The wind was blowing out like crazy on Sunday there. But they've got legitimate power. I don't care if the stadium is small. They have legitimate power in that lineup, and Colin Ritchie is kind of the leader of that pack. But Colin Brueggemann can hammer the baseball. Aiden Miola can hammer the baseball. They got dudes up and down that lineup that can really hit. I'm with you. I think it could be high scoring at times, especially if a guy like Cole Klecker can't go for Arizona State. That might throw a wrench in things for the Sun Devils this weekend. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to that week, that series. I think it's going to be a fun one. And
I'm going to add three more Pokes before we move on, Jamie.
Come on.
Alex Conover.
Yep.
Home run every game feels like. Brock Thompson, who I said a few weeks ago, I'm going to snort whatever drug I can take that will make me believe that Brock Thompson will win the Golden Spikes next season. I love him. And then the Papillion, Nebraska native, the freshman, Danny Wallace, who you just mentioned, played well against TCU. Believe he had a home run in that Sunday game. So that's three more guys that you can't leave anything in the zone to. So that's six. That's 2/3 of the lineup that we just named. Look out if you're Arizona State. And Arizona State does the exact same thing. You got Dean Toigo, again, new, however you say it, Contreras, Landon Hairston, a couple other guys that are escaping me. Who's Dominic Smaldino? It's going to be a lot of power. It's going to be fun. If you're a baseball fan and you're in 53 minutes of whatever you call the Flyover League, tune into ESPN2. You were probably already going to, though.
Listen, if you like baseball, go far. Oklahoma State, Arizona State's going to be the place to be. For sure. Baseball is going to go far a lot, I think, in that series. Two really interesting matchups here as we continue on. We've talked about Kansas State and Baylor, both really needing some wins, needing to kind of right the ship. They were both at home this weekend. Kansas State is hosting Cincinnati. Baylor is hosting UCF. Which of those series, in your eyes, is more important for those two schools that are currently on the outside looking in?
That's so tough. We talk about what these teams need. What is the secret sauce? I think K-State is closer to the tournament than Baylor is, so I would lean towards K-State because it feels like if I told you a Big 12 team wins a regional that is not currently projected to reach the NCAA tournament, you would be least surprised it was K-State. You'd be pretty surprised if Baylor won a regional. So for that reason alone, I think that this is more important for K-State against a Cincinnati team who's won 4 Big 12 series in a row, a program that is respectable, very, very good. Not that UCF isn't. They're great against Baylor as well. But K-State has to get back on track just for a program's sake. I think Baylor's still moving in the right direction, whether they win, lose, or draw against UCF. You hope it's not a draw, but you and I both know they love their weather delays. But either way, it feels a little bit bigger for K State, and we want to see what D Kennedy can do in the postseason. And if you don't reach the postseason, consequently, we don't see how D Kennedy can play in the postseason.
Yeah, that's going to be the disappointing part of all of this is like I think there are dudes in a couple of these situations where I don't want to see an NCAA tournament without D Kennedy in it. I just
Yeah.
don't. He's so fun. I know he's struggled defensively at times this year, but the bat is electric. The lineup around him is really solid. They just haven't been able to figure out the pitching, right? We've been talking about the bullpen all season, it feels like, with Kansas State. And yes, they had some injuries way early on. Carson Liggett, Dante Lewis, right? Some important pieces that they lost and had to shuffle things around. But you gotta have D Kennedy in the tournament. Like I feel like that at least. But if Kansas State takes 2 of 3 from Cincinnati, does that throw Cincinnati on the bubble? Right. And then are we talking about a situation where Nathan Taylor and Quentin Coates might not get in? I don't think that's the case because their RPI is in really solid condition right now. I think it's 21st. But, like why is there feels like there's a lot of give and take all of a sudden, especially just in that one weekend up in Manhattan. I don't know that there's as much give and take in UCF Baylor. So I'm kind of with you there. I think the pressure's more on Kansas State this weekend. Uh, the Knights need to go into Waco and just continue doing what they've been doing. And I'll just sound like a complete broken record here with the Bears and say they someone else has to do something. Someone else has to do something. We saw that a little bit this weekend against Texas Tech. I thought the lineup was much more well-rounded. The pitching is continuing to round into form as far as the rotation is concerned. Can you do it 2 weekends in a row, right? Step one, you did it in a weekend against an opponent that's pretty much down and out in the Red Raiders. Now you've got a top 4 team in the league coming in. Can you do the same thing against them?
Yeah. The big three being Tice Armstrong, uh,
Brady
Brady
Janusek
Janusek,
and
and
Travis
then
Sanders. Yeah.
Travis Sanders, of course, the shortstop, former second baseman. Those three, if you silence them, it's proven that you can beat Baylor. And unfortunately for Texas Tech, they could not silence Tice Armstrong, who had a monster weekend, won Big 12 Player of the Week last week. So almost in the same vein with D. Kennedy, you got to think, man, can we get Tice Armstrong in the NCAA tournament? You think the opening day, the guy hit 3 grand slams. That's never going to happen again, at least not anytime soon. I'm sure it'll happen again at some point. But either way, when a guy like that makes an immediate mark on college baseball and the league, spent his first few years of his career at UTA, but in terms of power baseball, you got to think that that guy's got to be in the mix as well. But unfortunately, like we keep touching on, Baylor has yet to win that signature series just as a program the last handful of years. This could be that. I don't know if the a series win against UCF has the juice to get them back in the full NCAA tournament picture, but maybe this is a series where a year from now we say, man, things really changed the tide for that program after they beat UCF. Maybe they played really well in the Big 12 tournament after that. Maybe they won their last series, and then look at that, they haven't lost a Big 12 series in however many long. But maybe that's just where we look at hypothetically in the future. But right now, I don't know. I don't know how strong the outlook could be for Baylor, just with the way that they've played the last handful of weeks, like we said earlier.
Yeah, it's just going to be tough, right? But as we talked about with Mitch Thompson earlier this season, you know, I think I pretty much asked him, is the roster where you want it? And he said we're still a little bit away, right? And he talked about his methodology for roster construction and how you supplement high school talent with talent out of the transfer portal. That's still the methodology that he wants to use. He wants to be a developmental program, a develop and retain program. And look, you've got good bones, right? You've got a guy like Brady Janusek on campus. Don't let him get off campus. There are going to be schools all around the country trying to get that dude in their uniform next year. Keep him a Baylor Bear. And so we saw good progress. I think at times we saw sparks from the Bears this year, but I don't think anybody would be shocked to say that the Bears are still maybe 1 or 2 years away from really kind of getting back to where the program used to be. It's just a matter of in this era of college athletics. My hope is that when a program, not necessarily Baylor specifically, but when a program finds themselves in that situation in year 3 or 4, like give the guy in charge the time to really do it, right? Give the guy the runway to make sure that he's turned over every stone. And then the last weekend series, Utah travels to TCU. Utah sitting there 81 RPI. I don't think their tournament chances are very likely at this point, unless they go on a major run here in the next 2.5 weeks. But they can certainly play spoiler. Boy, can they play spoiler this weekend in Fort Worth.
They absolutely can. And you tweeted out the spoiler of all spoilers that Tommy Lepore is back on Friday, which you also tweeted the week before. So I'm curious if this is going to actually come to fruition. Maybe you were just wrong. Who knows? But either way, I'm excited to see Tommy back and what the rotation actually looks like, because it feels like that 1-2-3 can be really, really good for TCU. But like you said earlier, this is kind of a must sweep situation, if not at least a must win a series for TCU. And Utah's playing with house money right now. That's a team who, when I saw them up in Lawrence, I talked about how the dugout has some confidence to them. They're scrappy. They'll chirp you right back. And then they put a scare into Arizona State a week later. And Coulter McNally got himself in trouble. He's back now. I'm interested to see what Utah can do in Fort Worth, because TCU needs this one. Utah really doesn't, but the joy of playing spoiler is definitely there. And again, maybe if they do win a few games, they can get back in that picture. That series win against BYU last week was huge for Utah if they're holding out hope for an NCAA tournament appearance. But either way, if we're going to talk about the turnaround that BYU has had, the turnaround that Utah has had is just as strong. They didn't make the Big 12 tournament last year. BYU did, of course, the last team in. But either way, they were even farther behind than Utah was last year, or than BYU was.
That's true. That's true. That's a good point. I'm excited to see Coulter McNally on Friday against Tommy Lepore. I was right last week, by the way. Tommy Lepore was slated to start on Friday. The TCU release with all of its game notes had him listed on Friday as well. It was not an injury-related scratch on Friday. It was another thing. Anywho,
Great grades weren't good enough.
Yeah, definitely a grades thing. Not a grades thing with Tommy Lepore. But he obviously threw later that weekend, right? So wasn't an injury situation. He is working his way back to full health, which is great news for him before anything else. As a guy who's got a chance to hear his name called pretty early in the MLB draft this June or July. I don't even know when the draft is happening at this point. Goodness. But yeah, no, this is a make or break weekend for TCU in a couple different ways, I think. And you're going to be without your head coach on Friday, which, for better, people can say, oh, well, how much of a difference does that really make? The pitching coach and the hitting coach will still be, it makes a big difference, right? So Kirk won't be there. He's not allowed in the facility on Friday. That's part of the suspension rules. So he won't be at Lupton Stadium. It's, you're reeling after a sweep against a team that you needed to go in and take two from. This is a Utah team that can hit the ball, and your pitching has not always been up to the task, especially in late innings. And the offense has really struggled at times to produce on a consistent basis. And a lot of that has to do with the guy just not being the guy at times in Sawyer Stroh-Snyder. So, look, TCU's got to get it figured out, right? Like we've said for a month now, TCU still has some runway. They looks like they're picking up steam, gaining some consistency, all this other kind of stuff. Well, the runway is pretty much gone at this point, because you got this weekend against Utah, and then you travel to Morgantown next weekend to close out the regular season. So it's now. The time is now. The plane's got to take off if you're the Horned Frogs. So we'll see if they can do it this weekend. It's a tough Utah team. It's a really good ball club. That I love this offense. I love the way they play. They're gritty, right? They get after you. And TCU hasn't necessarily responded well when they've gotten hit in the face this year.
And Jed Gilliam might be the most underrated player in the country for Utah. Feels like nobody talks about how good he actually is. But back to TCU, I think they have the potential to be either the 2 seed that you don't want to see in your regional, or the 3 seed that you really want to see in your regional, or potentially missing the tournament. But if you're telling me they're making the tournament, it's either the 2 seed, like, oh no, we got TCU, they're playing really well right now, and they're also really good, or hey, we got TCU, they can't field the ball when Oklahoma State hits one on the warning track, and we can hit home run after home run against them, and they can't hit back. So there's some Jekyll and Hyde there, and that's the exact opposite of where we saw TCU being 3 months ago.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation for the preseason favorites to find themselves in here with 2 weekends to go. I mean, they're sitting there 7th in the Big 12, right? 7 spots lower than we anticipated them being, or I guess 6. So they wouldn't be 0. There's no such thing as that. Any final notes about this weekend before we wrap this episode up?
I think we did a good job touching on it all. Just excited to see the weather turning. I don't know how much that matters, but we're talking about Kansas, K State, maybe I assume Cincinnati. I think it snowed near Cincinnati this weekend. I could be making that up.
Jeez.
But just the transition of weather, like I know it doesn't really matter that much for us watching at home or even in a press box, what that looks like. But um, we have teams going from playing in 50s or 60s to in a couple weeks you're headed to Arizona to play in 100 degrees. I want to see teams get a little bit thawed out before that happens. I've been nervous about that concept for our Midwestern and Northeast team in West Virginia and Cincinnati of how they handle the heat when you get thrown in there because I know I wouldn't handle it well. And in fact, it scares me to just think about for those teams because even Texas was hot last year for me, Jamie. So I feel sorry for those kids who have to turn in their winter coats for shorts and short sleeves very, very quickly.
Well, it's a high of 79 here in Fort Worth tomorrow, so I think you'd
Wow.
survive.
Okay. That's the perfect medium. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it
64
is.
degrees is my perfect temperature. I don't know if anybody's
Well,
ever asked me that, but 64 is perfect.
look at what temperature it is right now in Fort Worth, Texas.
Wow, that is unbelievable. You can't make that up.
64 degrees. Sounds like Noah's moving down south, folks. But until he hops into the U-Haul van and gets down here in time for us to record on our normal Monday night next week, we will see you after a great weekend of Big 12 baseball. Y'all take care.